be sharing an in-depth look at their inclusive grading practices. At the Herring Center for Inclusive Education at the University of Washington, we continue to be thrilled to partner with OSPI and our exemplary demonstration schools. We took the feedback from our introduction to demo sites webinars, where attendees repeatedly mentioned that they wanted to hear more about some of the specific inclusionary practices demonstration sites discussed in their schools. So here we are today doing just that. We're going to take a deep dive into the inclusive grading with Clovis Point Intermediate School. So joining us today are inclusion specialists from the Herring Center for Inclusive Education. My name is Cassie Martin, and I'll be walking us through the webinar today. Inclusion specialists Christina Nowak and Naomi Fair are also joining us today. Our project coordinator, Molly Lyman, is also here in case you experience any technological difficulties. Before we dive in, let's make sure we have everything ready to get started. As we get started, please test your audio on the bottom left-hand corner of the menu. Thank you for sharing comments and ideas in the chat. If you have a question, please use the Q&A feature instead. This allows for us not to lose the questions in the chat and also allows for all participants to see those questions. We will be recording today's webinar and it'll be provided on the Herring Center's Demonstration Sites webpage. The recording from today will be available by the end of the week. As we go through the webinar, please keep this webinar etiquette in mind. We encourage a growth mindset where you're open to thinking about new ideas and willing to push yourself to grow. Thank you for joining us today, for being present, positive, and engaged. So let's take a minute and practice in the chat. So share what impact you hope today's webinar will have on your school's inclusionary practices. We'll be able to reference this information later, and it's useful for us in future planning. So go ahead, if there's anything you're thinking about today, place it in the chat and we can reference it, look at it. Our colleagues and partners from Clovis Point can reference that and they can make sure they include it as they're talking about inclusive grading today. So anything you're hoping to hear about, go ahead and stick it in the chat. To start, here's a little background information about the Demonstration Sites project. In fall of 2019, OSPI launched the Inclusionary Practices Professional Development Project. The Herring Center partnered with OSPI to coordinate and lead this part of the larger statewide project, which is creating model demonstration sites that highlight inclusionary practices across Washington state. I love how we have already in the chat that people are looking for deeper understanding of more equitable grading practices. Excellent. We'll be talking about that today. Learning innovative ways to grade. It doesn't seem possible right now with the systems and structures that are currently in place. How students with modified grading receive a letter grade as opposed to pass-fail. That's great. These are all things that Clovis Point's going to be talking about today. We're so happy that you're here joining us. So the Demonstration Sites project was developed to provide educators from around the state with the opportunity to observe inclusionary practices in action, meet with school teams, collect artifacts that aid in systems change, and learn about how to implement inclusionary practices in different school contexts. Our demonstration sites highlight the diversity of our state. In collaboration with Herring Center Inclusion Specialists, the original intention and future intention of this project is for demonstration sites to host visiting schools to showcase high-leverage inclusionary practices. And by sharing these practices and opening their doors, teachers, administrators, families, and community members see the best practices in action and apply them in their schools. So at the same time, the demonstration sites themselves continue to grow their inclusive cultures and refine their practices that contribute to equitable learning for all students. Clearly right now, we have some constraints around literally opening our doors, but have been doing our best to pivot and continue to provide transformational learning using this virtual format. And that's how you hear about Clovis Point today. So there are some founding principles that drive our demonstration sites work. To start, in every school, there are things that are working well. In education, we have a tendency to examine the problems associated with our practices instead of examining what's working well, why it's working well, and how we can use that information to make things better. This asset-based approach is a productive way for schools to leverage their strengths to become more inclusive. Also, inclusion is not a special education initiative, but it's a cultural shift in philosophy and practice. If we simply change the way that we're delivering special education services without considering the culture of the entire school or how each and every student engages in teaching and learning, we will never make the changes we need to truly impact student learning. Through the course of our webinars and by way of scheduling virtual visits, districts, schools, and communities can learn more about what steps are taken to make these shifts to become a more inclusive school. So to get us started, can we have some polling? We want to know who's here today. So let us know. Do we have administrators, teachers, parents, family members, specialists? Looks like we have some administrators. Welcome. Teachers, we're so happy that you're here. Specialists, community-based organizations. Great, great. Well, thank you for joining us today. We're really happy that you're here. So in the fall, Clovis Point shared their journey towards becoming a more inclusive school for each and every student. Their journey has evolved and continues to evolve over the course of the past few years and includes engaging in several high-stakes inclusionary practices. And today we're excited to highlight one of those inclusive practices today. Today, Clovis Point is providing a deep dive and in-depth look into inclusive grading. So we are very happy to introduce the team from Clovis Point Intermediate School in Eastmont School District. Today joining us are Kesley Grode, 7th grade math and science, Dustin Johnson and Carrie Stewart, special education teachers. Also joining us is Matthew Davis, school psychologist. Without further introduction, I will hand it over to Clovis Point. And Dustin, you need to unmute.
I feel like I have too many screens and windows all open at the same time. So I'm Dustin Johnson. I am an inclusion specialist here at Clovis Point. We want to start off by giving you a little picture of what Clovis Point would look like if you walked in our doors. So the demographics you have on there, really the things that stand out are our racial mix is primarily white and Hispanic Latino, and not a lot of diversity outside of that. We have about 15% of our students are English language learners. And as far as our ones that have learning disabilities, it's about 12%. There is a fair amount of overlap in there too. Working with the 6th and 7th, there's about a third of our students that are dual qualified, that are both on an IEP and also receive English language learner services. At Clovis right now, it is a season of upheaval. We've got, they redrew our attendance areas, so these demographics will probably shift to some degree. We are also transitioning. Currently, we are a 5 through 7 school, so our elementaries go K through 4. They have an intermediate school. There's 2 intermediate schools right now in our district that are 5-7, a junior high of 8 and 9, and a high school that is 10 through 12. So that's going to shift starting next year, with the elementaries being K6, the junior highs being 7 through 9, and then the high school being 10 through 12. So right now, currently, we have a lot of staff who aren't sure where they'll be next year. That they'll probably be teaching in the same kind of position, but it might be in a different building, different admin. So it is a big year of change. With respect to this specific topic, right now, our K through 4 schools have report cards that look like a checklist of skills with a check plus minus on multiple specific skills in categories. And starting in 5th grade, we move to the A through F system. So the question right now is, what will our 5th and 6th grade do? Will we take on the skill-based checklist of the K4? Will we continue to do the ABCDF? So some of this conversation, if we were to move with more of the checklist, would be for those other grades, and we would move into there. And so even as we're doing this and we think we have some things worked out, it's about flexibility, and as changes come, we have to kind of move with those and always be centered on the students and what's going to work for them. So here's, I'll go ahead and move to the next one. This is just a picture of some of our students. Obviously, being involved in this project, we're proud of the inclusive culture that we've taken on in our school. In every picture, there are students that are on IEPs and there are students who are not. And if you look at the picture, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference between those students. They're not in a separate place doing separate things. They're doing the same things as everybody else in their class. There just might be subtle differences if you looked closely in what tools they're using, or the content that they're working with might be slightly adjusted. But it really is a place where students are right alongside their non-disabled peers doing similar activities, and it's not a place where they're off somewhere else doing a different program. So the main inclusionary practices that we've focused on are moving from having special ed teachers in a separate room with their kids coming to them. We moved to a co-taught class that was sort of leveled, and then we moved to a co-taught plan where our special ed teachers went in and joined and co-planned and taught alongside a general ed teacher, where some little pods of our more needy students were specifically placed. And then with COVID, that kind of became a whole different sudden change because of the way that students were distributed and the hybrid scheduling and all that. So it's been a process of slightly changing what we're doing each year. The modified grading started a few years back, and we'll talk about the evolution of that coming up here. But that's our main focus in this deep dive. But intertwined with that, we found that we really couldn't separate the assistive or accessible technology that we were using with those students. It's kind of like if you start talking about grading, you can't help but talk about instruction because they go so hand in hand. So when we look at the modified grading, we determined that we needed a comprehensive overhaul of our grading practices for our students that had highly impacting disabilities. We needed them to not just get a pass fail, which really is highly uninformative, and we needed them to get some constructive feedback about how well are they doing and where they might improve to do better academically, to get a better grade. We want students to see that their effort and engagement are key components of their success, and that our instructional decisions should determine the appropriate amount of challenge, rather than serving the same instruction to everyone and then kind of saying, well, you tried, here's your pass. That really didn't do anybody any good, and we severely felt that it was lacking. As far as the staff, it's helped having this modified grading more explicit and in a document that you can hold and look at. It's helped facilitate our culture shift. It's been an ongoing process, and we've had to, I guess the best word would be remediate with our teachers who are having a difficult time letting go of years or even decades of picturing assessment and grading in a certain way, and kind of opening their view a little bit to see the need and why we're doing what we're doing. So the why of modified grading, like mentioned before, the pass fail really isn't actionable. And by actionable, I think of what happened with my own son. He came back in third grade, I think it was, and he had on his thing, that he was behind. It was a minus or a check or something in multiplication facts. So as the parent, I think, oh, I can fix that. We sat down after a weekend of some strategic practice and explanation there, he had them. So that feedback was something that I could take action on as a parent, or if it was the student, could look and say, here's something I need to study. A pass fail, it doesn't really communicate much. It doesn't communicate what the targets are. It doesn't communicate what's going well, where improvements needed. There's almost an implied message that we don't want to send of, it doesn't really matter what you're doing because you're not doing what everybody else is doing. So this is a letter that we can fill in that empty spot on your report card. That's not what we want to happen. We want a grade that has all the meaning and communication that anybody else would have. This all started, there's a little picture there on the slide of a locker with this orange piece of paper on it. That piece of paper is one of our honor roll announcements that the admin would print, and they would go through and they would put on the locker of everybody who made the honor roll. And we had this little guy who, he was just your picture of perfect effort. He was on an IEP and he consistently got his pass. And he came to, Kesley, was it our vice principal that he came to? I think I'm making her juggle her slides here. I think it was our vice principal. And so he came up and said, how do I get one of those things on my locker? And it sort of brought to the forefront this need of a system that would reward this child with the praise and honor that he deserved for all the effort he was putting in. Was he able to do the same tasks to the level of the A students next to him in that class? No. Was he working at the top of his ability and trying and studying and doing all those things that other A students do, and maybe even better than some of those A students do? He was. And so it became this glaring thing of, we need to do something about this. So it's kind of neat. The same student is a 7th grader this year. And so to be able to kind of lay eyes on the student who instigated this thing that we've adopted and sort of think of as a key piece to what we do to make our classes more inclusive. And it's even the small things, like when you think about, students talk about their grades. They say, hey, what did you get in Mr. Johnson's math class? And the student with an IEP shouldn't have to feel awkward. They shouldn't have to say, I got a P, when everyone else is answering with, oh, I got a B minus, or, whatever. We want to minimize those situations that make them feel excluded. So even in the small things, we want them to have that feedback and a grade that they can share and talk about if kids want to share and talk about their grade. It's just part of that full picture of what inclusion looks like. So I think whenever we're carrying out a practice or a policy, we have to stop and pause and say, what does this feel like if you're standing in the kid's shoes? What does this feel like to be the parent of that kid, and you receive a report card that just has straight P's? Yeah, they're passing everything, but do you tell their child, you're doing well, great job? Do you tell them like, hey, you can do better than this, I want to see you work a little harder, let's try and get these up to what? Because there's nothing other than the P. So it's not just the kid. If we don't have a grading system that gives the parents that opportunity to give feedback and encouragement to their child the same way that we would everyone else, we're also excluding the parents from that experience and that part of it. So we wanted something concrete that could help facilitate the conversations with teachers who were having a difficult time adjusting their notions. So we knew we needed to do this modified grading. What should it look like? How do we get other teachers on board? What's the sort of anchor that it's all going to tie to? So that's where we came up with this rubric. And we knew that we needed some criteria for measuring their success, but it needed to be based on their own hoop. So thinking about like, jumping through a hoop. If you want an A, you got to jump in a hoop that's this high. You want a B, well, jumping through this hoop would be okay. They needed their own set of hoops. And so our rubric was our attempt to fashion something that everyone could look at and know where's the target, how do we react to that target, what's the feedback. So the success looks different in different situations. And then this little cartoon is, for me, it was something that really cemented the shift. So I felt the shift in myself the first time I saw this, and I thought that's perfect, because the thing that we run into when we're trying to introduce this or explain to teachers why we're talking about doing this was this deeply ingrained notion that it is somehow unfair to grade one of these students over here with this system and everybody else is graded on this system. And when you look at this cartoon, you can see the little monkey there. He's just as pleased as punch because this test suits him rather well. Everyone else has kind of a, I don't know what the word for it is, kind of a stumped expression because they realize they're not equipped to even have a chance at passing this test. So what to me this said was, it's not that it's unfair to grade students differently. What's unfair is to not grade them differently. And that, I think, when you can get a teacher to see that, it goes a long way into adopting and the buy-in of what we're trying to accomplish here. So this is a little brief picture of the decision tree that we use when we're deciding anything about modified grading. So the question about who and when makes this decision about modified grading, it's the IEP team. When they're looking at the students' needs, everyone's at the table and we're discussing, like, should this person's grade be on a different set of standards? So there's this flow chart that takes us through that with the little questions, and we really have three options. This visual is going to be one of the artifacts, so we apologize that it's small, but we just kind of wanted to give a little brief image here. If you're interested in the rubric, the flow chart, that stuff will all be available to download. But basically we have three options. We've got, they're left on standard grading in the case where some accommodations in place and some slight modifications to how instruction is provided allows them to access that content perfectly well. If that's not the case, then we had two rubrics that we could use. One of them is where content is a fairly decent portion of the rubric. And by content, I mean, are they able to show their learning? What level of misconceptions are there, if any? What does their task completion look like? Things like that are on there. The third option was in cases where they're participating in the academics, but the greater focus is on the socialization, the behavior, the student skills. So it allowed us to not just modify grading, but also to have levels of that modification to where we could really tailor it to the students. So somebody asked at the beginning of the webinar here, like, how do we go into an ABCDF? So this little key is the magic here. So again, don't worry about not being able to see the rubric, but we've got some sort of categories on one side and it goes 0 through 4 on the top. In each of the categories, you look at what describes them, they get a point, you total those points, and then this conversion table is the magic piece that turns your observations into an ABCDF. To get an A, if you look at the fact that there's 5 levels there and the highest score is a 4, look on the conversion there, you would need, well, I guess a 16 if you round it up, but technically a 17 to get an A. So an A is going to require 3s with at least 1 or 2 4s. Straight twos is a nice middle C. So what we've done is we go through this rubric with these students once it's on their plan and kind of explain, these are the things that we're going to be looking for. This is how you're graded. So they know what a C looks like, what an A looks like. They know what an F looks like. It would take an average of straight ones to be just minimally passing. So the combination of those points gets converted into their A, B, C, D, F. Carrie, you're muted, just like I was. You'd think after a year of remote school, we'd have this down by now.
You are correct. Oh my gosh. I'm Carrie Stewart, one of the inclusion specialists at Clovis Point. And I'm going to talk about the evolution of our rubric. So the original rubric had 5 different criterion: content, task completion, effort, attitude, and peer interaction. And we changed that and made some new criterion. And I know Dustin talked about some of the new criterion. We focused a lot on the content. So one of the big changes we made was to include more content related criteria in the, and because most of our students with IEPs are receiving tier 1 instruction with accommodations or modifications. And they're getting all that tier 1 content. So it's a large part of the academic grading rubric. So now we have content, learning concepts, big idea, content, task completion, and content, task quality. Then we changed the effort to self-advocacy. So for example, it was that the student attempts all tasks. Now it's without adult prompting, student takes initiative. So the wording is changed for more of a self-advocacy piece. Then we removed the attitude and peer interaction, as those were not necessarily task related, and added a criterion for independence related to the task that's being graded. And then we adjusted the conversion chart for the rubric. I shouldn't say conversion chart, it was the rubric point scale, so that Fs were possible, but would obviously be a choice, not a consequence of the disability. So originally on our old rubric that was given to us, it was impossible to fail. And after much discussion, we determined that students across all grading rubrics could receive a failing grade, but it would have to be due to specific circumstances. We wanted to keep expectations high for all students and to give students ownership. The idea was to make grading more equitable and for it to be useful for students, not just something teachers were assigning. So how we started, year 1 was jumping in and learning by doing. The first year of the rubric was a learning experience for everyone. And that's when we took our surveys, and that was in our first webinar, and increased the equity awareness and grading among the staff. And there were teachers concerned that more inclusive grading practices would get some students off the hook, but we really approached this in a different way. It was that we wanted to have high expectations for everyone, and by assessing our students in a way that was inclusive and aligned with our inclusive vision. It created better equity and increased student engagement. We wanted to make sure every student knew that their work, their engagement, their part in our school community mattered. And the second year, we really took a look at our students and the rubric. The rubric we adopted was from LaPorte, and it fit the needs for their students. We were using the rubric slightly different than LaPorte, so we decided to make changes to fit the needs of our students and best fit our school culture. And then the next steps upcoming, we're going to kind of step back, not make changes, and the district is adopting these more inclusive grading practices to make it a district-wide standard and taking a more equity-based approach to grading system-wide. So that's pretty great for us that the district is doing to do that. And it was great to see the students who get grading from this rubric, and to see a student that has an IEP get their test score back. I got an A. And just to see their faces light up, because they understood the content, they knew how to do it, they got the grade they deserved.
But I think too, like when we talk about making it district wide, that wasn't really our focus. We were focused on what we needed. So, and I haven't looked at the rubric in this light, but I think there would be some necessary changes if I were talking about a kindergarten or first grade student as opposed to a 6th or 7th grade student. So I think that what we might see when the district is done looking at this and kind of making a version that's distributable to all levels is there might actually be versions of the rubric that morph as students go up the grades. So it'll be interesting to see what they do, kind of taking what was started and then making it something that's applicable to all those different grade bands.
Exactly, because we fit it to the needs of our students, and with those different grade levels, it is going to have to change, I think, for those different needs as well. All right, so with that in mind, we also made this rubric, the rubric student and parent friendly. So we included a student language version of the rubric with I can statements. And I have an example of that on the next slide. And then we also translated the grading rubric and the student friendly rubric into Spanish. So at the beginning of the slides, you saw that our demographics were very high in the Hispanic Latino community. So when we're at an IEP meeting and we're talking about having a child go on the modified grading rubric, it's great to have it translated so the parents are understanding exactly what we're talking about. And even though we have translators, to have the document already translated is a win. So we have it all ready to go. And this is what the student grading rubric looks like when in there for them. So this is the I can statements, and I did a speech bubble for one of them. I can show my learning by myself. So that is in relation to the content of learning concepts, big ideas. And this is going over to Dustin, but just so you know, when you do get the rubric, you are going to get all 4 versions, to Spanish, to English, the grading version and the student version, and the conversion chart. All right, Dustin.
So we kind of alluded to this earlier, but there were some barriers to implementation. There are still some barriers to implementation. It's a community shift, and a community shift is always going to take some effort. It's going to take some time. So we still have these occasional difficult conversations in which we need to remind a colleague about what we're doing and why, again and again. And that's okay, because we've got that document that we can come back to and say, this is, it's about the hoops. We can use the cartoon. It's because not every student is equipped to climb a tree. We want to assess them on what are they doing with the talents and skills that they have. Let's play off the strengths. And so, sometimes the statements are, but they're not doing this work, or they're not using this template that I provided. So that actually has led itself to some productive conversations about instruction, accommodations, supports. So when there's sort of this clinging to, but it needs to look like this, then we can come along with rubric and say, well, does it really need to look like that? Or could we say this is what they're working toward, and for them an A is getting to this point with these tools? So we have to shift our mental pictures of what an A student looks like and what a C student looks like. And those are so built in, and especially those teachers or those of us who've been doing this for a really long time, it's a big shift in our thinking, and you can't expect that to happen just because you put a document in their hand. It takes those conversations. It takes us working with them to keep going over it. And so it's not like we passed this out in our school, just instantly fell in line and everybody was implementing it. We're still coming alongside teachers and saying, hey, do you need some help doing your grades with student X and student Y, or do you got it? And then checking in, like, so how did they come out in history, and sort of keeping it as their case managers, keeping a tab on that. And so we're teaching students, but we're also teaching our staff. We're teaching them in a new way of working on grading. We're teaching them a new way to look at their students with learning disabilities. And I think sometimes it's a strength and a challenge, but the amount of subjectivity or the different standards is uncomfortable for some educators. I can say this without offending math teachers too much because that's my endorsement area. But math teachers tend to be very kind of linear minded. And it's like we're so used to, oh, you got 17 out of 23. That's this percent that converts to this grade. And on we go to the next assignment. So it's hard for those kind of personalities. But at the same time, other teachers will kind of take that as a strength of the matrix and the process, because they can look at it and say, the way this is worded, I can look at it and say, okay, they did most of it, or they did about half of it. And they can look at that task completion, and it allows them to make those professional judgment calls. There's lots of variables when it comes to education and students and assessment. So it's our belief that most of the time it's the work that needs to change, meaning the task. Can we change the format? Can we change the length? Can we change the content? Let's change the work to meet the kid instead of expecting the kid to change to meet our work. I mean, ideally, we want them to be able to do all kinds of things. But in the moment of our instruction, our task, it's the work that can change. It's our instruction. It's our approach that can change. We can't sit back and demand that the student change to our expectations before we give them any feedback that says, hey, you did good there. That was a success. So this next standard, kind of like this slide, is about the same thing. Our rubric purposely has some generalized language. So you do have to sort of estimate and approximate. What it does is it lets you get to the heart of the IEP, get to the intent of it, instead of arbitrary lines in the sand over certain percentages. So when we think about what the point of grading is, it can sometimes, and I think to students, oftentimes feels like it's a game of got ya. You messed up here, so I'm going to dock some points. And I think it's important to make sure that we're reflecting that our intent is not to highlight their challenges or to rebuke them for what they've done in error. We want to acknowledge and encourage success with meaningful feedback that takes into account their individuality.
So how we measure success. Success is defined as a demonstration of growth towards the mastery of a given content or skill. Because students in a differentiated classroom are often working on different tasks and completing different products to show mastery, what would you say next to end this sentence? So I'm asking the audience, go ahead and put that in the chat. Let's get your thoughts on this. Awesome. All right, success can be shown in a variety of ways. Their strengths are being utilized. Nice. All right. So because students in a differentiated classroom are often working on different tasks and completing different products to show mastery, then our process of assessment must necessarily be different as well. All right, thank you guys. It's Kesley. Kesley's going to take over.
All right, can you hear me? Am I here? I'm having some technical difficulties, so I can't really see anyone, but hopefully you guys are all here. So I'm Kesley, and I'm going to just kind of talk about the assistive technology part of what's kind of helped me with the modified grading and some of the other gen ed teachers here. So with a little bit of this, we're really just talking about how to measure success when it's modified. Like, how can we do that in different ways? And it doesn't just have to be for those students who need the accommodations and the modifications. And as I started doing different assistive technology, we start to realize that really everybody in the classroom needs it. I think a lot of the times we forget that there's so many kids in our class that just learn in different ways. And I'm younger to this teaching thing. I'm newer here. This is my 4th year teaching. And I think back to the times when I was in class and I didn't struggle much with anything except math, which is a full circle of why I'm teaching it now. And I always thought to myself, I never want to teach it like how my 7th grade math teacher taught it. And so that was always my idea of teaching, is I kind of want to do it a different way than what I remembered in 7th grade for just one specific subject. And so full circle, I'm teaching math, so I always try to find these different ways to do it. But this applies to, I also teach science, but English and history, all of what I'm going to talk about today can benefit you guys in some sort of way as well. So some of these assistive and accessible technologies that we use. Carrie, I know that you have a better, Carrie the other day when we were doing our run through had a really good kind of quote or saying with assistive technology versus accessible. And so Carrie, would you want to maybe tell us what that was, since it's you that had it?
Yeah, so I came across this in an IRIS module, actually, and assistive technology versus accessible technology. So I found out that assistive technology, and actually I like the way Dustin phrased it on the one slide. So often what is helpful to students who need accommodations is helpful to all students. And it turns out to be good instructional practice. So assistive technology is a device or service that is used to increase, maintain, or improve the functional capabilities of an individual with a disability. So like a screen reader software or computer. Accessible technology is technology that is beneficial for those with or without disabilities. So like a speech to text. And we were getting that kind of technology for our students with disabilities, with IEPs, but it really is accessible technology because it's great for everyone, and we were having everyone use it. So that's a lot of our, what we thought was assistive technology really is accessible technology. So it's great to see everybody reaping the benefits of all this technology.
Thank you, Carrie. I can't remember all of what you had to say, so I didn't want to take any credit for that.
No, that's fine.
Yeah, so here are just some of those accessible assistive technology that we've been using at Clovis. I know that there's more. I'm going to focus on the Go Formative part today a little bit more, just because that's what I've been really experimenting with this year, and it's been really helpful for a lot of other teachers. But Go Formative is free, and if you guys want, I can add this into links too, or you guys can write them down. Go Formative is extremely user friendly. And like I said, I'll talk about that on the next slide. So I'll kind of just ignore that one for now, but it is free to sign up. Flipgrid is another resource. Our intervention specialists, reading specialist teachers couldn't really find a good way to record kids for reading and doing their some of their reading activities. And so they found Flipgrid, and our EL teacher uses this all the time for our EL students, and it's been extremely helpful for her as well. But it allows students to record themselves, whether it's reading or whatever you want them to do, and they can send it really easily. And like it says on there, empower. A lot of these have those empower every voice. It's just another tool that allows kids to easily show their growth in reading or an EL, whatever they're doing in there. So it's a free resource. They say it's really user friendly. I have yet to use it. I just wanted to add that in here as another source for you know, you guys out there if you need anything extra. I put in there speech to text and text to speech just because that's something we use, but it's something that after having these discussions with modified grading, why aren't all teachers letting all kids use these text to speech or speech to text? And so that's been a really big culture shift here. And you see that now where they allow kids to use that often. And then Cami is another great resource too. And I'm sure a lot of people have maybe heard about Cami. But Cami is another one that's really easy to upload any PDFs or pictures, and kids can put in text box. So I could take something like a science lab we were doing on Cami, and I can put in text box where they need to answer or fill in pictures. We use Cami to send some of the IEPs home to get signatures on it. What's great about Cami is right away, right then, our English teachers and history teachers used it a lot in the beginning, and you can highlight and have that text to speech on there, and you can use the speech to text really easily on Cami. So it's another one that's free. And again, they say free, but you can add on and pay for, you know, extras. But those are some of those resources, again, that we've used or teachers here have used. And I just wanted to throw them in there.
Kesley,
yeah.
I just want to interject another thing
go
about
for it.
another good thing about Cami. A lot of times teachers use PDF documents, and PDF documents, you can't use text to speech. Well, Cami will do an OCR on it to convert it so it can be read from text to speech.
Oh, that's
so
awesome.
That is a great feature.
I think too, in this time of, I think we're all, what's that word, inundated with all these apps and programs, because it's remote learning and all this, that we're not really talking about remote learning here. We're talking about how does this help kids access the information. So for example, some of the things in Go Formative, when I'm thinking about the students that I'm working with, Kesley's been pretty instrumental in our school as far as using it to sort of pioneer how she can implement the Go Formative. And it looks like she's going to talk about that here in a minute. These are things that aren't going to go away just because now everybody's in person. This isn't about being remote. This is about tools that allow us to be more flexible in how we accommodate kids to show their understanding so that we can grade more authentically, because we've been really able to get at what's buried in there. What do they know that would have been hidden in more traditional, here's your paper, pencil, multiple choice math test. Let's see how you do. There's just so much more available with the tools that we have. So just wanted to make sure that we're clear that because it's easy for my eyes to glaze over when people start talking about yet another app that you can use for remote learning, because you just reach a saturation point. But these are tools for accommodation. It's tools for making our instruction more accessible.
Yeah, thank you, Dustin. So I have a lot of science and math on here too. And like Dustin said, these are things that I will continue using if we're all back next year. It's not online. They're things that I find helpful and the kids actually really enjoy from Go Formative. I just call it formative. So if I do that, the real name is Go Formative, but I just go with formative. So how this all came about was one of our seventh grade math teachers last March was like, if we are online for this, I have to find something that's easy for math to be able to have kids show their work, put in answers. And so it kind of started with that idea of what are we going to do for math to make it easy enough to do work so that kids are learning and we can see work and they can show work and so on. So this idea started as how are we going to do this for math, and really just took off in our school as how can we use this for history? How can we use this for science? So one great thing about formative is it keeps everything on there for you. So any like you can see right here, I put notes on here from the rock cycle. And this I used to help with some students who needed accommodations for test taking. And so they are allowed to use notes. And so what I decided to do was also just include audio of my voice explaining what our notes were as well. So all I did was scan in a picture of my notes, super easy, went on to Formative, uploaded it, and they have all these different options of ways that you can answer questions, that you can share information. This one is one of my favorites. It's the audio option. So if I put in articles, I can read it, and kids can choose to listen to it if they want, and they can choose to not listen to it if they want. And one of the first articles I put up there, I originally did the audio for just the kids that needed that accommodation. But I was like, you know what? I'm going to share this for everybody. I'm going to let all the kids, if they want to listen to my voice, they can listen to it. And I had a student who's at like a 12th grade reading level. She had emailed me and said, I don't know what it is about your voice, but I find it very calming. So thank you for letting me listen to it instead of reading it today. And you know, you get that message and you're like, oh, really? You find it calming? Because I do not like to listen to my voice back at all. And so just to have somebody who is capable of reading, who can read really well, just say, I really liked being able to just listen to your voice, read it again. It made me think, okay, if this student likes it, then why am I not sharing this all the time for all of my students? So that's what's really nice about this, is that you can add in this audio, and you can also have kids answer questions using audio as well. So if I have hey, what is an igneous rock? Maybe I don't want them to type it out. I can click on here and have the option for answering it, be the talk to just audio. And so kids really like that. And then eventually what you start seeing is, hey, I'll just try to write it. And so that was really helpful, especially when we were online, but it's still helpful if we're doing certain things in class. Another thing we've done are lab experiments. When the kids came back into the classroom, we were able to do some of these labs, but I still have a hybrid model, and for kids who are absent. So I was able to find videos or make my own videos and just attach them to the worksheet. So I have the worksheet over here, and I was able to put in all of the videos of what we were doing, and they could just answer the questions right there and watch the video. And then same with coloring. Kids really like coloring in 7th grade, it turns out. And we were calculating density in class, and it was being able to color as well. And a kid online said, well, I want to color. And he doesn't have a printer at home. And so I set this as a background on a show your work option, and I placed the picture in there, and then the kids were able to go in there and color. And so they really liked doing that as well. And so they don't have red, so they had to use orange. But kids were like, well, we want to color too. So it gave them that feeling of, hey, we're kind of coloring in class as well. For math, same thing here. Upload just a picture from the math book or the PDF from the math book. And you can click on all these different options for how you want them to answer. Multiple choice, multiple selection, matching. The list goes on. The numeric one, or the number one, is amazing because you're able to really put in all of those math calculations and have it look really good. And again, this was easy because we can just put the videos that are attached to the book on here. And as they click on this, it just logs them in right away. But the best feature about formative for me, for math anyways, is the feedback instantly option. And so when the kids come here to do their math and they're doing percents, they're able to put in their answer. And there's a little taskbar that goes across of how many questions they have. And when they put in an answer on number 1 or number 2 or number 3, the little dot above turns green or it turns red. And so you can turn this on and off. I don't do this for multiple choice because they'll just click through and then they know which one's right. But for problems where they're just filling it in, it shows green. And so when they know it's green, they can just move on. And then when they get to red and they try different options and they can't figure it out, they have a little chat option on formative and they can say, hey, I need help with this. So I just click on it right there and I'm able to either do a short little video and send it to them privately with nobody else seeing, or I can just chat with them and say, hey, it's supposed to be a negative. Or, hey, what did you see? Why do you think 24 is wrong? Do you think that? And then they'll go, oh yeah, it's supposed to be a negative 24, or whatever the case is. But you can privately talk to them, and the kids really like that, opposed to like on a Google chat where they have to ask in front of everybody. You can modify extremely easy on here. So maybe I want to do evens or odds. I just copy what I've already done. And then I just go in and I edit it. And so when you share into your Google Classroom or whatever you use, I can restrict it to share it with certain students. And so I would do that in class and I would share it, but it looks like the same thing on Google Classroom. So I say, hey, you're going to do assignment number 5. It might say like 5A on theirs. And it looks like they're doing everything the exact same, even if it is shortened or they have different options to answer. So one thing that Dustin and I actually talked about today is we have a student who is rushing through work and she just continues to not really want to double check her work or anything. And so the kids, since they've been back in school, like to use paper because they're like, we missed doing this. And so they don't always want to be on the Chromebook, which is not for work. They want to be on the Chromebook, but not for work. So Dustin and I were chatting today, and we kind of came with this idea of why don't we just have her continue doing her work on formative so that she can see if her answers are right or wrong. And so that kind of eliminates the rushing through, because she'll have to stop and ask those questions, or she'll have to stop and really think about it. She won't be able to just put her answers through. And I've kind of done this with the class on and off, like, hey, do it on the paper and check on formative. I'm going to grade it from your paper so they can see answers. But this was just a really easy solution to say, hey, we're going to have so-and-so, we're going to have you do this on the computer. This is part of your thing. And then, you know, you can go from there, and you can have other kids do it too, so she doesn't feel like it's just to her. But again, in 7th grade, most kids just kind of do their own thing. So that was kind of one easy solution that Dustin and I came up today, just by going, hey, on formative, they can see if they're right or wrong.
I think it's good too, because sometimes there's a handful of students, like you particularly think of the student who's struggling with the concept. They're not always aware of whether they have questions or not. Sometimes they're doing it completely wrong and they think it's right because they thought they understood, or they are doing it right, but they're not sure. So they don't know, do I continue doing that? Should I try something else? So that instant feedback is kind of what you wish could happen with every student, where you can kind of be right beside them and go, yep, that's right. You're doing it correct. So with the students that we're working with, that is a great accommodation where they get instant feedback on, is what they're practicing the right way to practice it? Are they generating correct answers, or are they missing something? And so not just a pacing, they can also know, I need to ask a question because I keep doing what I thought she said to do, and none of these are turning out right.
Yeah. And it's nice because you can put in extra notes above too. So kids can look at the notes that they took in class and then scroll up and go, oh yeah, okay. And then scroll down. So it is nice with all of those options, but the instant feedback the kids loved. And so they actually had our history teacher who my team partner this year, she switched from CAMI for her history and ELA to formative. She felt like the grading was easier on it because you can just grade as you go. And if a kid gets it wrong, but maybe they just went to the wrong decimal point, you can still give them some points. And so, yeah. So anyways, if you have any questions, you can email me or ask. I am no expert by any means at formative. I've just found it extremely useful and very beneficial for my students this year, especially those students with IEPs. So,
I think the main point here too is that accommodations aren't just something we do when we've got a cool tool. We got to do them anyway.
Yes.
But the tools have made it so easy to blend it in to where the experience feels the same for all students. It's enjoyable and not heavily time consuming to think, oh, what could I add to this? And it makes it really easy to really do quality accommodations.
And before you start takeaways, Dustin, I just wanted to add in that, why are we doing assistive technology on a modified grading deep dive webinar? Well, self-advocacy on the criterion. The students are advocating to use this assistive technology. We have this for them so that they can get those high scores on this rubric. So they have these tools here for them. Kesley gives them these tools. They know that if they need to use the text to speech to hear a question for their math assessment, that they can use that. If they're not doing that, then they're not self-advocating for themselves. So that's how it ties into the rubric and the modified rubric, the assistive technology. Yeah.
It comes back to the hoops as well. Giving the tools lets you shift where the hoop is. Sometimes it's helping them get a little step up to get to the same hoop. Sometimes it's making the hoop different, but those tools are what's allowing us to do that fairly easily.
Yes. And Kesley's a rock star at it.
I get by.
So we should probably be wrapping up. Kesley,
yes.
Do you want to do the takeaways?
Yeah, I mean, I can go for it.
Okay.
I think too, Carrie, thanks for jumping in and saying that, because we are talking about this modified grading and these rubrics, and it is helpful, but it's not all about grading. It's the perception about who's included and how do all students learn. So it's made this culture shift at our school of, the point is, I don't just give this kid an F. The point is, why is he getting this F? And what is the reasoning for that? What aren't we doing to help this person learn? You know, there are going to be kids that just choose to not do anything. And I understand that, and I always will. But I think too, someone who learns differently in math, when I was growing up, I couldn't just sit down and stare at a book and do these problems and say, hey, it's in your notes. And so I just think that kids learn so differently. And so this was part of that. Is it's not really just about grading. What are those tools that we can help them with their understanding? So shifting those grading practices really helped us look at teaching and learning differently. And so I think a lot of teachers, maybe the first year, were like, no way, this doesn't seem fair. And now I think they're starting to realize, like, wow, we can change this learning to be different, and it will meet the needs of those kids that I've struggled with before. And not only is it meeting the needs that are the kids that have struggled before, it's really meeting the needs of all students, and it's increasing learning for everyone. And so I think that culture shift is starting here. and it's definitely getting better. And I think too, having something that's uniform, having Dustin and Carrie and Brandy come and say, hey, this is this modified grading rubric. This is why we use it, and explain it to us, and have that reasoning behind why we grade the way we do helped a lot of teachers realize, like, oh, I've been kind of modifying, accommodating, and changing grades already in my own way, but this is a concrete way of proving why you're doing it. And I know that was really helpful for me, that if somebody came and said, well, how did so-and-so get a C in your class? I can pull out the rubric and I can say, well, I graded him like this or her like this. And it's an easy way to show why and how you are grading a student with accommodations or modifications. So it's just that uniform, concrete way of doing it. And again, like I've said, it's definitely changed the school culture with learning and how we like to how we teach. So just having that system in place, just recognizing students' engagement and success, all students' success, has been very eye-opening for me. And I know that using just these tips and tools that Dustin give and Carrie give and Brandy give us, and using this modified grading last year and this year, I've seen so much success with kids who have never felt it before. Like a kid got an A the other day on an assignment, and I didn't even have to modify anything. And that was just because throughout this year, he's starting to realize, like, wow, I can do all of this stuff. And when kids believe that they can do it and you give them the tools to learn, what they end up doing will blow you out of the water. And that's what I've noticed with this. So like I said, I'm no expert at anything I do, but I have seen a lot of success. And what I see with that success is that students stop wanting to do evens and odds, and they want to do all of them. And they want to stop doing the text to speech or speech to text, and they just want to start writing. So yeah, that's kind of the takeaways we have. And Dustin or Carrie, you can add on whatever you
I think it's just, I mean, when you really boil it down, the whole point of this is to change our lenses, to change our view. As teachers, we change how we see our students. We don't just look at, these students are capable of meeting the standard and these aren't. We look at the students and say, what are they capable of doing? How can I help them get there? How can I push them further? And how can I communicate to them that they are an A student, regardless of how their work may be different? So it's about changing their view of themselves, that they can look in the mirror and say, that's what an A student looks like. And as teachers, we can see the strengths and opportunities for growth in all of our students. So we're going to have the artifacts and resources are downloadable from the website, and I think the slides as well, but we'll pass it back to the UW staff.
All right, so a tremendous thank you to Clovis Point for sharing an in-depth look at inclusive grading and how technology supports student learning. We want to do a quick share in the chat. If you guys could put in the chat your answers to these questions. What are the systems, culture, and/or leadership practices you heard about today that support inclusive schools? And what are some initial steps you can take back to your own school? So a word or phrase in the chat would be great. And while those are coming in, again, a big thanks to Kesley, Dustin, and Carrie from Clovis Point Intermediate School. If you'd like to hear more from them, please feel free to reach out and we can connect you with them. And to learn more about the Demonstration Sites project and OSPI's Inclusionary Practices Professional Development Project, please visit these websites or feel free to email us at uwdemosites@uw.edu. Also, visit our website where we will be posting a recording of this webinar along with a folder with the resources and artifacts presented today. All right, we have another fun activity for you guys. So our goal is to build relationships and reach schools across Washington State. In that spirit, let's take a minute to hear about where you're joining us from today. So please use the URL in the chat, which is paulev.com/hearing center, to let us know what county or ESD you're joining us from today. Or if it's easier, just put your ESD in the chat. So as you guys respond, we'll start to see little markers pop up. Looks like I see ESD 121 represented, ESD 105, 123, 101. Awesome. And I do see that someone in the chat wrote that they're looking forward to taking a closer look at the rubrics. That's awesome. Okay, we would love to get feedback on our session today. This will give us information we can use to effectively share DemoSite's inclusionary practices in webinar format in the future. If you please click this link and fill out the brief survey through Google Forms. This survey is anonymous, and Molly will send clock hour forms to those who are in attendance after this webinar. Thank you again to OSPI and CSEP for their partnership in this project. Another thanks to Clovis Point Intermediate School for your inspiring work. Thanks to all of you for joining us today to learn more about inclusionary practices and for envisioning how you might take some of what you learned today and apply it to your schools. We hope you will join us for future webinars and that when our doors open again, you will take advantage in person of visiting our Washington State demonstration sites. So thank you all again. It was a pleasure having you with us today and enjoy the rest of your Thursday.